This is James. He was a drug addict and his family totally ignored him, so he ended up on the streets playing his music for money. He had to crash outside every night and would even go through the trash just to eat. Nobody even looked his way. One time, James went to a restaurant to get some grub, but he didn't have enough cash to cover it. So instead of giving him the food, the clerk just chucked it in the sink. It made James feel really bummed out, so he had to bounce. He really wanted to go back to his family, so he decided to go to a rehab program for drug addicts. But one day his friend Baz, who's also an addict, asked him to get in a car that he had stolen. Baz convinced him to start using drugs again. At first, James said no, but eventually he gave in and used drugs again. The next day, the owner of the car showed up and Baz took off right away while James was found passed out. They rushed him to the hospital right away. When Val, his companion in rehab, showed up, James immediately asked about his guitar. It was the only thing he cared about. Val was furious and said she was done helping him. She was tired of his empty apologies and broken promises to stay clean. After James got out of the hospital, he swung by Val's office to say sorry once more. Luckily, Val was still willing to forgive him as long as he promised to come see her every 2 weeks to check on his condition. She also wrote him a prescription for methadone, which is a painkiller used to help treat opioid addiction. Before he left, Val even asked James to sing her a song. Val really looked out for James and wanted to help him. She even asked her boss to find him a place to stay because she believed his rehab wouldn't work if he was still homeless. James was so stoked when he saw his new house. He couldn't stop thanking Val for everything. He even swore he'd stick to his rehab program until he was totally drug-free. When James was chilling in the tub after ages, he heard a funky noise out of nowhere. When he checked, turns out it was just a stray cat. James knew the orange cat was probs hungry, so he hooked it up with some milk. Turns out, even though he used to have problems with drugs, James had a good heart. He calmly told the cat to bounce home before its owner came looking, but the kitty looked like it wanted to stay, so James let it crash for the night. The next day, James went around knocking on doors to find the owner of the orange cat he had with him. But since he couldn't find the owner, he ended up letting the cat go. In the city, James was playing music in front of a building when he unexpectedly ran into his dad. He mentioned to his dad that he was in a program to get better. With his stepmom around, who didn't like him at all, he asked if he could spend Christmas with his dad, but his stepmom said no and walked away. His dad didn't know what to do, so he just gave him some money. When James got back home, he was shocked to see the orange cat in agony from a wound. He was really concerned and quickly asked for help. Luckily, his neighbor Betty, who happened to be a volunteer at the animal health center, was able to provide first aid to the cat. She told James to take the cat to the center for further treatment. Before she left, Betty suggested that James give the cat a name, so he started calling him Bob. When James got to the clinic, he was kind of nervous because the line was super long and he had a meeting with Val later that day, but he toughed it out for Bob's sake and stayed in line. After James got checked out, he had to shell out some cash for the medicine, which was more than he expected. Turns out, the clinic only did free checkups, not free meds, so he had no choice but to use the money his dad gave him yesterday to get Bob's medicine. Back at home, James had a hard time giving Bob his medicine, so he had to ask Betty for help again. Not only did she help, but she also gave Bob 2 cans of canned cat food. Despite living in an area with lots of drug addicts, Betty said she was clean of drugs and hated people who used drugs. Hearing this, James had to lie and say he was just a musician looking for inspiration for a new song, without mentioning his past as a drug addict. The next day, James met up with Val to explain why he couldn't keep his promise the day before. He had a big smile on his face as he told her about his new friends, Bob the cat and Betty. But when Val heard about Betty, she got really concerned. She told James that he wasn't in the right place to start a relationship. James felt really down after hearing that, but luckily Bob was there to cheer him up a bit. One day, when James was heading into town to play music on the streets, Bob decided to tag along even though he had been told not to. So, whether he liked it or not, James had to bring Bob with him. It turns out that when Bob was with him, a bunch of people noticed, and some even asked to take a picture with him. Usually, when he played music on the street, nobody paid attention. But this time, thanks to Bob, a bunch of folks actually stopped to listen. James was super stoked because he made a ton of dough from his busking. Then this old lady who had watched his show before came up to him and said that Bob would be his companion. and that a cat could be a better buddy than a person. After the old lady took off from afar, Baz caught a glimpse of James stuffing a bunch of cash into his pocket by accident. Since he was interested in what James was up to, he decided to keep following him. The next day, when James was getting ready to go play music for money on the street, Baz came up to him out of nowhere. James didn't want to chill with him anymore because he didn't want to get tempted to do drugs again, so he ended up giving Baz some money to get him to leave him alone. Bob once again grabbed everyone's attention with his performance. He had a lot of fans, including the old lady who came to see him yesterday. This time, she brought him a Christmas gift, cat food, and a scarf. James was really inspired by having Bob around. After getting the cold shoulder from his family, James finally found joy again. He shared all his happiness with Betty and thanked God for bringing her and Bob into his life. The next day, James picked up different cat foods for Bob because he really loved his furry friend. Bob always rode on his shoulders wherever they went. When they got back home, James was shocked to find Baz passed out on the floor from an overdose. He panicked and called for help, and luckily Betty came to assist. Thankfully, the ambulance arrived shortly after and rushed Baz to the hospital. Unfortunately, after that thing happened, Betty got really freaked out, like someone who's been through some serious trauma. After she calmed down a bit, she told James that she used to live with her sibling who was addicted to drugs. When her sibling passed away from an overdose, it took her months to get back on track. Since then, she's had no interest in being around anyone who's addicted, let alone dating them. When James heard this, he went straight to Val and told her he wanted to kick his drug habit quickly. He didn't want to keep taking methadone, but Val said he needed to take it slow and not rush the process. She promised that after Christmas, he could try to stop taking it. To make a long story short, Christmas came around and James decided to go to his dad's place. He was a little scared, thinking it was a bad idea. And it was true. When he and Bob got there, Bob went crazy and caused a ruckus, even knocking over the Christmas tree. Because of that, they had to leave. Luckily, James got to hang out with Bob and Betty for Christmas. He was super happy and even got a painting as a present from Betty. It just made him feel really thankful for how things were improving in his life. Once, when James was performing on the street, some jerk let his dog pee on his bag on purpose. James got super pissed and tried to go after the guy. Their fight drew a crowd, and the cops ended up taking James away. Thankfully, Val managed to get James out of the cop shop as long as he promised to stop playing music on the street. If he got caught doing it again, he'd be locked up for half a year. James wasn't bothered at all. He seemed really agitated because he was fretting about Bob. Val suggested he go pick up some methadone from the drugstore to help him chill out. Betty ran into James at the pharmacy and flipped out when she saw him taking methadone. She felt totally betrayed and didn't even want to hear his side of the story. James went from being happy to feeling like crap in no time. In order to scrape by, James ended up working as a newspaper seller for the Big Issue Company. Before he started, his boss laid down some rules he had to follow. Once again, thanks to Bob, James had no problem selling his newspapers. They even caught the eye of a passing journalist who got permission to interview and cover them. This made a jealous coworker, especially when someone bought a paper from James in his area. The coworker tattled to the boss, and James got suspended for a month. One day, James was fed up because he was running out of money. He got really annoyed when Bob wouldn't stop meowing, and he ended up snapping at him, but then he realized that he had overreacted. James decided to bust out his guitar to make some quick cash, so he and Bob could grab a bite to eat, despite being banned by the police. He played at a few different spots until Betty spotted him and gave him a talking to. She knew the cops weren't cool with him busking anymore. She was so worried of him, it was like she was low-key telling him she had a crush on him. To make a long story short, James's break from work was done and he could go back to selling newspapers. But when he was out on the job that day, someone came up and tried to make James sell Bob to her son. James said no, and they got into a big argument. A dog started barking and scared Bob, so he took off running. James ran after him right away. After looking everywhere for Bob, James couldn't find him and started feeling super sad and worried about his buddy. His love for Bob was so strong that he started blaming himself for not taking care of him better. Val got worried about James too. Meanwhile, the news about James and Bob going missing blew up on the internet and in the newspapers, catching the eye of a leader of a writing agency. It had been a few days and James still couldn't track down Bob. Getting really stressed out, James went up to the drug dealer near his place to see if they knew where Bob was. When James got back home, all of a sudden Bob was there. James was so thankful and gave Bob a big hug right away. To make a long story short, Val finally gave James permission to take a break from methadone for a week. This was the final stage of his rehab. If James pulled it off, he would be totally drug-free. With Bob by his side, James was confident he could handle it. Right before finishing up his rehab, James wanted to say sorry to Betty for all the lies he told. Betty, who had a thing for James, finally forgave him and told him to stay strong during the rest of his recovery. After a week of toughing it out, James finally made it through rehab. And of course, his buddy Bob was there for him the whole time. Things started looking up for James after that. He was totally off drugs. His friend Val was thrilled for him too. When James was about to share some exciting news with Betty, he realized that she was about to move in with her parents. However, Betty didn't see it as a goodbye, since James could still visit her at her new place. A couple days later, the writing agency that liked James asked him to team up with them. They wanted James to write a book about his and Bob's story. When James got back from the writing agency, he made a point to visit his dad's place. His old man was thrilled to hear that James was off drugs. James said sorry for letting the family down. His dad then handed over a photo of James that he had been carrying in his wallet all this while. Turns out, he never gave up on James. He just felt bad for not being a better dad. Long story short, James's first book release was a big deal. People lined up to get James and Bob's autographs. Everyone who had ever been a part of James's life, like Betty, Val, and his dad, showed up too.